We're still going strong, reviewing all of the Awakened tanks that I own, and today it might sound like a familiar situation to our previous tank, the Wraith, as this tank is another variant of another premium tank, but this one has spaced armor and differences that come from having that spaced armor. That tank is the Tier 8 British premium medium tank, the Inferno Chimera, a skin version of the Chimera. It's got quite a big gun for a Tier 8 medium, with its 5-incher, above average am I right boys, which is actually a 127mm gun. This is a unique caliber as it is different from a 12-8, but it still overmatches the same plates as one. This tank can overmatch 40mm plates like 122mm can, but 120mm cannot, even up to 42mm plates if you can find any of those. For its size, it deals a hefty 440 alpha damage at tier 8, which is really high, and it was the only 440 alpha damage tier 8 medium before the Reaper Scythe was introduced with the Warhammer tanks. This comes with what I would hope would be an obvious downside though, the DPM. It reloads at base every 15.5 seconds for a DPM of only 1703. This is obviously below average, but surprisingly not as bad as you'd think. There's many other tanks that sit around this tank's DPM that aren't as hard hitting, but they're mainly pref tanks in that regard, and those that are worse are mostly auto and auto reloaders. While those tanks benefit from either not seeing tier 10 or having burst damage, this thing still has the benefit of taking a big chunk out of whatever it pens, and its pens don't suffer badly either. It's better than some pref tanks that haven't been buffed yet, so not the STA2, with 202 standard AP penetration at a slow 732 shell speed. Luckily its premium round is APDS with 252 premium penetration and a better shell speed at 914, but it's still not hitting 1000 shell speeds unfortunately. It's pretty low for a non-heat premium round in terms of penetration, but it's still usable of course. But at times you'll wish you had a heat round instead. Don't be confused by the APDS denomination, it functions like APCR, so you do get worse normalization values than the standard rounds. Everything we've gone over so far is identical to its counterpart premium tank, the Chimera, unlike the Wraith that had less DPM than its counterpart. It's not until we get into the gun handling you'll see one difference that's actually quite unfortunate, and that is its base 0.42 accuracy. This is worse than the Chimera by 0.02, and being this bad to begin with a 0.02 base accuracy difference is pretty big. They both share a bad 2.9 seconds aim time, which luckily isn't worse on the Inferno, but on the bright side they do have 10 degrees of gun depression, which is phenomenal. It means you can work ridges quite well and play hold down in many positions. Gun depression opens up many opportunities for you, and this tank takes advantage of those opportunities. And your armor will help you take advantage of that depression with its thick turret and spaced armor. This tank's biggest difference to the regular Chimera is that spaced armor, and it makes quite a big difference on that turret, with a big 50mm lion right on the face of this tank. It covers a flat 203mm face that has curved mantlet parts. On the Chimera, this 203mm face is quite easily pennable when the tank is on flats itself, with standard penetration even at its tier. But gun depression will help its face. Whereas the Inferno here adds 50mm to that 203mm and completely eats heat rounds that would otherwise easily pen its counterpart. The cupola is still visible on this tank, but the line does cover a portion of it, and with wiggling you can cover even more if they're aiming there, especially while you're using the gun depression. That spaced armor line ends up covering even more and being very good spaced armor for the cupola. Don't be afraid to do that wiggle either, because although the sides of the turret are only 76mm, they're pretty hard angled back, so just a slight wiggle keeps them angled. Plus if they choose to snap at those sides, you still have 50mm spaced armor ears and horns that might get hit instead and help out those sides. There's more helpful spaced armor too, with 30mm grippers on the front of the drive wheel that really helps side scraping in this tank. You have 76mm side armor on the front end of the tank, and the back end is only 50.8. There is a cut corner angled back on the top of the hull of 88mm that gets slightly covered too by the spaced armor when angling, and fully covered when angling and using gun depression. On top of that, you have 10mm side skirts and 20mm tracks, so quite a bit of spaced armor. So if you're fighting one of these things, your best bets are the upper back side of the hull to hit just the 50.8 if they're over angling, or hoping you can see that cut corner. All that being said, you're going to want to make use of your gun depression or side scraping, because your upper and lower plates are only 114mm, with the lower plate being less angled than the upper plate. Definitely your weakest part of the tank. I will say though, that while playing this tank, it can be really easy to give up armor to be penned, because you're quite large and wide. Side scraping, despite what I just said about the spaced armor, can be difficult because to get your gun around the corner, you either over angle or give up your lower upper plates to do so. The turret armor is definitely the best part of the tank with the 50mm spaced armor, so use that gun depression instead of trying to side scrape most of the time. That spaced armor is also the best and only positive difference between this tank and the regular Chimera. And with spaced armor adding weight, what can we expect to see for its speeds? Well, it actually isn't as bad like the Wraith was in the mobility differences. They share the same top speeds with a 50km/h top speed, and with the same 900 horsepower engine, the power to weight ratio is actually still pretty decent. The regular Chimera hits 15.95, which is barely above my 15 power to weight ratio threshold, while the Inferno here stays above that threshold with 15.76. Despite massive 50mm spaced armor additions, its power to weight doesn't take a massive hit, unlike the Wraith did. This one is very slight in its downsides for its upsides in my opinion. That armor difference is pretty massive for the mobility differences to not feel that much different. Even your traverse speed is only 2 worse for the tracks and 4 worse for the turret at 28 and 24. So if you were expecting a big hit like the Wraith got, you might be surprised with this one. We shouldn't expect anything to be worse really when it comes to its spotting capabilities though, and that's correct because they both share a 380 meters view range. This is closer to the bottom range of view ranges for the class and tier, behind many 390 and 400 meter view range mediums, but as a brawler tank it's not really too hindering. Surprisingly, its camos are not that bad though, and it's probably because despite its size and width, it's not that tall. But again, with that width, it's hard to fit in bushes effectively to really utilize that camo, but it's something you can do. Although it's mostly that accuracy that pushes you forward to brawl, as you don't want to sit back and just miss shots with long reloads over and over at fast moving light tanks or far away targets. So you get into the fight and make use of that armor and damage up close instead. Its camo is slightly worse than the regular Chimera 2 because the spaced armor makes it a larger tank in volume and slightly in height with the horns. But it's only a 2 meters difference with 377 moving and 355 still concealment. Overall, the Inferno may feel like the same situation as the Wraith previously, as just a spaced armored version of its counterpart tank. But where the Wraith has differences in DPM, HP, and turns a paper tank into a well-armored one, the Inferno turns a already good armored tank into a better one, with minimal other differences that doesn't really set it apart from the Chimera. And that may sound like a downside to this tank, but it's actually a downside to the Chimera. We're back to saying what we said about a few of those skin versions of tanks in the past, and that is, this is the version of the Chimera to pick up. It has better armor, and its mobility doesn't take that big of a hit as its speeds aren't lowered, its power to weight ratio is virtually the same, and the only biggest downside is the accuracy loss by 0.02 at an already bad 0.4. But with 6.0, I'd take that for the large upside of that frontal turret armor helping from face pens. That's really the biggest thing here in my opinion. On top of better armor, it of course plays in an event mode, so really no need for that regular Chimera in my opinion. This is the version to have between the two tanks, hands down. And when this tank awakens in the mode 2, it's one of the most interesting ones to play. We're finally really getting into those interesting abilities at this point, whereas the Revenant felt like the only interesting one so far. This one has 3 lives. That means you respawn after dying twice. And each life has a different ability tied to it. With your first life, you have quick repair times and are immune to ramming damage. This is very strong, and on screen I have some footage provided by our friend Scareface showing the power of that ramming. You become a brick that the enemy has to steer clear of, and in the case of the Bellerophons, you really have to avoid using your pull shells, because if you pull them in, you might doom yourself. I know we haven't gone over the Bellerophon yet, and that is the next tank, but, spoiler alert, it can push or pull tanks with its shells, and we use this in a platoon to pull tanks into the Inferno for free kills. It's quite a strong and fun combo to pull off. But the Inferno only has 900 HP to use per life, and once you're out of that life, you respawn somewhere on the map and gain a new power, where you have increased traverse and top speeds in camo. Not sure how the camo really affects the tanks, but the speeds are nice. It is worth mentioning you lose your previous abilities from previous lives though. Dying again respawns you on your last life that has great pen and faster reload speeds. You're on your last defense at this point, so you get to rip apart your enemies hoping not to be taken out yourself, because again, you only have 900 HP per life. There is a way to differentiate what life an Inferno may be on if you come across one, and that's their color. The first life has deep purple accents, the second has bluish green accents, and the third is a more lighter purple color. This tank is pretty fun and interesting, but it can be frustrating to die easily with that low HP, and honestly only 2 of the 3 lives feel really nice, those being the first and third. Having to remember too what life you're on and what life does what can be annoying too, while other tanks only have one ability for you to remember. I will be showcasing this tank's abilities here on my Halloween livestream here on YouTube, so I hope to see you there. And since my Twitch chat tells me I should remind you guys to subscribe, I'll tell you that, hey, subbing to the channel can notify you when that livestream goes live. Wink wink. I'm not gonna lie, that felt kind of weird, sorry, but I really would appreciate if you did, because we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and we can definitely do it. If you did press that button, thank you very much. Otherwise, this tank is decent in standard play and interesting and fun in the Awaken mode. I didn't really enjoy my time too much though when playing this tank in standard, and it felt like a pain to get good games in this tank, as the accuracy and DPM is lacking. This tank is available in the Monster Hunter op, but I wouldn't recommend it above something like the Wraith, or even some future tanks we haven't reviewed yet. It's not the bottom of the barrel of options though, so it's more of the middle of the road. If you want the Chimera, however, and you don't have that regular variant, definitely get this one over that one, and there you have it. That's the Inferno. Let's quickly go over my loadout before we get into the gameplay. I ran with an optics loader and vents equipment setup, a premium repair kit, food rations, and standard medkit consumable setup, and my commander had a 6th sense, rapid loading, steady aim, camo expertise, situational awareness, born leader, silent driving, snapshot, and a run and gun setup. And here we are on Sand River. There was one other game that I felt kind of showcased my aggressive abilities in this thing, but ultimately it was just against one tank, so it wasn't really that much of a power play. Instead, I went with my highest base XP game, which, spoiler alert, isn't even an ace tanker. Like I said in previous reviews, or in even this review earlier, there are some of these tanks that I just couldn't get a really good game to showcase. And while some of them were super easy, like the Hull and Hound, where that one took me the first game, and some of them were super enjoyable to constantly play, like the Wraith and some future ones that we haven't touched yet, this one really was a drag. And I'd say there was like maybe 4 of them that were like that. And we've gone over a few of them, and that was we've gone over all of them actually. So hopefully, if I'm remembering correctly actually right now as I say this, this is the last of the drag tanks. You had the Revenant, which what is like, and when I say they're drag tanks, they're not terrible tanks, right? Let me quickly say what we're doing here in this game, though. We're just taking this position as its encounter, so most of the fight's going to happen in the north. Luckily for us, that means we get to sit here, hold down with 10 degrees of gun depression, and farm these guys that are pushing across. And since you usually only get 1 shot into them pushing across, having 440 alpha damage takes a nice chunk out of them when they do. Again, this is the only 440 alpha tank at tier 8 as a medium, other than the Reaper Scythe, which is relatively new, and you actually can't get anymore until they bring back Warhammer tanks. So for all intents and purposes, this is the only 440 alpha tier 8 medium available to you. So that is another draw to this tank, but it was a drag, and that's because its DPM's lacking, it's wide, so even though it's potentially good at side scraping, you still have to either over angle to get your gun around the corner or expose a lower plate. But this one was a drag, and the Revenant was, the Dragon was, and the Kaiju was. Funny that the Dragon was a drag, right? But even with 0.42 accuracy base, we still hit that shot blind on the Borsig there, which is actually quite impressive, because if you know how aiming in this game works, and you know, like, derpier guns, right, lob shells, when you aim at a tank that's spotted, it will give you the range of that tank. And this game, you don't have to raise your barrel to compensate for shell drop, right? So when a tank goes invisible like that, and your range meter changes by more than 100 meters, sorry, your accuracy actually gets worse, despite like you aiming at a target that's closer than your range meter is saying. And that's with every gun, but many guns, you don't really notice that difference. With this being a 127mm with .42 base accuracy, I could have potentially missed that blind fire. Anyway, that blind fire happened quite a while ago, so... but yes. The lure to this tank really is that alpha damage. And there we go, .42 accuracy, but 6.0, we just snapshot a tank, doesn't matter. And we've already done 3,000 damage, and it's 10-6. Not even 4 minutes into the match yet. Panther spotted on the other side of the map. We did a little bit of aiming, and we ended up missing. Oh well. Also, not 1,000 shell speed, so I really had to take that shot as he was going behind the ridge. Unironically, I think I should have shot immediately, and I might have had a better chance of hitting it, because that's how the game works. In a backwards exponential way, I have this feeling of, but anyway. We're going to make sure we don't miss this one for 483. And he's shooting HE. And with our space armor, hopefully that helps eat it up a bit. But now we have a tank destroyer that's actually behind us. Although the tank destroyer was spotted, he was near the cap. What we actually got shot at is by the light tank in our spawn. And something else too, because he definitely isn't the one that hit us that hard. So we're kind of in a pickle despite it being 8-5, but don't worry. We still have the numbers advantage. We have control over the cap circle in a way. That Panther 2, I think it was, it's not an 88, right? Is going to get pushed by my heavies here soon, so I'm not too worried about getting shot in the rear now because I know how aggressive these guys are being. I can understand picking up this tank purely because of that alpha damage too, by the way, but I would really recommend not. And it's kind of just because I can't overstate how odd the width on this tank is. It's like it's not like super wide, right? But it's just it's weird. Because you can see I'm kind of aiming at a 45 right now, but I would be over-angling my back end, right? So you can't side scrape. Despite, you know, me sitting there saying how good it was, I did also say that because of the width, to get the gun around the corner to even side scrape in the first place, you got to expose something. Or you got to over-angle or expose something. And for that reason, it's really a hold-down only tank. But if you're lucky enough to bait a shot while side scraping before you poke, right, you can utilize that. Obviously, we weren't going to on Sand River, but it is what it is. It's now 5-2, as I've been rambling on and driving in the dried up river. And this Panzer 58 Mutz, great tank, love that tank, was full health, 2 shots in, and I mean, look how much damage we took off of that guy, right? Like, it's a hard-hitting tank. Right, it really does feel very powerful when you do hit your shots, because as we are at tier 8, you can 3-shot a lot of tanks. There are a lot of tanks with less than 1300 HP, and with 3 shots at 440, you can hit for 1320, right? As long as you don't low roll. Now let me say, for the rest of this game, you might laugh at me. Just gonna be up front. We got a bit greedy here, and we've missed 2 shots that maybe we shouldn't have, right? If we were in the Chimera with .02 better accuracy, we might have hit those shots, right? But we missed both of those shots, and it doesn't end there. It's now 4-1. We are 1 shot now because of the amazing DPM of that Mutz with 300 alpha, which is also quite a nice chunk of damage for its DPM and reload. The Mutz is a formidable opponent. If he was still 240, we'd have some leftover HP by the time our team got there. If he was 280, we'd have just a little bit more, but he's 300 now. And I can't say enough. That Wraith, even though this isn't a review for the Wraith, I'm going to tell you again, the Wraith was great. I recommend the Wraith. And like I said about this one earlier too, this tank doesn't differentiate itself enough from the Chimera to warrant having a Chimera. So like when I say that, I'm not saying don't pick this tank up. I'm saying this is the version to pick up instead of the Chimera. Whereas owning the Mutz and the Wraith, you get 2 similar feeling but different enough feeling tanks that it's worth having both. This one, if you have the Chimera, sucks to suck because getting the Inferno would just be better. But anyway, no one wants to rush out a light tank on Sand River, so we're just waiting. Luckily, these bushes are pretty big. You can see, though, with 380 base view range and cameras that aren't that good, I failed to mention this at the camo portion, I guess, but usually when you have low view range, you're going to have better camo, right? So, like, the Udez at tier 10 is one of the best camoed mediums, but it only has 390 view range. So it's not known as, like, a great spotter. Having that camo just helps you in your range from your spotting distance to your camo, which is why, like, the Patton had bad camo, but it had 420 view range, right? So, like, there's still, like, rough lines you play in. You just can't play at longer distances, but you can play as effectively at shorter. And so, despite this tank having pretty decent camo, especially compared to some of the 390 and 400 meter view range tanks, it's because it has 380 view range that doesn't make it that much of a sniper or spotter at distance, right? Whereas the Mutz has 380 as well. There's another shot that we missed. Honestly, that one shouldn't have missed. That should have been our 5,000 damage shot. But sad to say it, it's looking like we're not going to get 5,000 damage. And we're not getting 5,000 damage. I would have loved to have gotten it for you, but we didn't. So, again, maybe the Chimera would have hit those with 0.02 better accuracy, but I feel like that shot on the light tank as he threw it. It's probably too because of the shell distance, or the shell speeds. But I digress. Yeah, so back to the camo thing. Since this is the end of the game, quickly touch on this, or finish this thought. The Wraith has better camo, same view range, thus it can perform the more stealthy role. This has the same view range, decent camo compared to other tanks with better view ranges, but it's those better view ranges that make this tank more of a brawling role compared to those more being sniper spotters. And that's just something kind of inherent on many tanks. Anyway, like I said, I think I spoiled it earlier. Not an ace tanker. 1761 base XP. I don't know if getting that kill on the light tank and getting 5,000 damage would have pushed it to an ace, but I would like to believe it would have. But then again, we didn't get it, so it doesn't matter. That's the Inferno. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Take care.